James Thomas Morning Blend. We're doing a series with Justine Petersen. And today we have Galen Gondolfi. He's the Senior Loan Counselor and Chief Communications Officer. And he came to Justine Petersen in 2003. Now, in his time at Justine Petersen, he's held positions in the housing and microenterprise departments, and most currently in communications and development. Now, Galen routinely speaks at national events and conferences on issues of microfinance, credit building, microenterprise, and the plight of the underbanked. Prior to joining Justine Petersen, Galen worked for community development organizations in Chicago, Boston, and Washington, D.C. That's quite a bit, Galen. You've been around a little bit.
Around the block a couple times.
Yeah, definitely. So today we want to talk about injustice in or disparities in lending. Isn't that what we're supposed to be talking about today?
By all means, yeah.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. What have you seen in the lending industry? I mean, Justine Petersen has done a pretty good job as far as low income and moderate people looking for loans. But what do you?
Sure. Yeah, I first want to start and say that Justine Petersen furthers the mission and the legacy of Justine M. Petersen, who indeed was a social worker and was a pioneer in many ways, in many respects, here in the St. Louis market, working with low and moderate income families to achieve the dream of home ownership, and working with banks 35 years ago to craft mortgages that are accessible. And James, today's conversation is all about access, right? It's all about access, and the racial equity gap, the wealth gap, all speaks to lack of access. And Justine Petersen makes every attempt to bridge that gap, that is to provide opportunities for individuals and families to gain access to mainstream financial products and services. What does that mean? That means money. Competitive money that's priced at competitive interest rates to buy a car, to buy a house, to start a small business. And, in today's discussion, I think we'll touch upon the importance of credit scores, the importance of having banking and products, services available in neighborhoods. Many neighborhoods in St. Louis are what we call a banking desert. And if we have enough time, I'll even maybe talk a little bit about CRA, the Community Reinvestment Act, which is this legislative apparatus that requires banks to reinvest in neighborhoods that have been historically under-resourced.
So let's get into the very first topic you talked about. Let's go right into that.
Sure. I'm sorry, that first question, James, about lending?
Yes, definitely.
Sure. I think there was kind of a delay. Sure. So lending, here's what I want to say about lending in St. Louis. I don't want to beat up on the banks, but I do want to say that I think St. Louis is somewhat of a conservative and provincial lending environment, and that we need to do everything to change that and broaden the horizons of both banks and credit unions. And this all speaks to this idea of being bankable, what a banking profile is. And all of that starts with, and it sounds like I'm oversimplifying, but it starts with your personal credit score. It really does. Even if you're starting a business, banks are going to look at your personal credit score, not your business credit score. They're going to ask for a personal guarantee. Definitely if you're a startup business, even if you're a business up and running for 5 years or 10 years, they're going to ask for a personal guarantee. So as much as you want to separate yourself from your business, be it an LLC, and have a buffer, I fully understand that. But I am going to tell you, when it comes to borrowing money from banks in St. Louis, they're going to be looking at you. And it's about your personal credit score. And building a personal credit score can be relatively simple. It can be inexpensive, but it can be transformational. And I'm borrowing those three adjectives or descriptors from our CEO and founder, Rob Boyle, who kind of speaks to those three elements of a credit score. It can be easy to build, it can be inexpensive, and it can be transformational. And at Justine Petersen, we lend money to help people build credit scores, which means when you borrow money from us and when you pay back, We report monthly to credit bureaus, and that builds your credit score. So it's this idea of not only making capital accessible, but building a credit score. I talk about credential poverty. It's different than poverty of not having money. It's not having the right credentials. And believe it or not, I meet a lot of individuals who have decent cash flow, impressive cash flow. The household actually has money coming in and coming out. But maybe a lot of it's undocumented, and it's not building a credit score. It's not building this credential. And hence there's this idea of credential poverty. I just want to say this much. You can go into a bank, you can knock on their door, you can say, look, I got a house for collateral and I got all this cash flow going on. And if you don't have the credit score that they're looking for, you're still not going to get the loan. And that's me being a Justine Petersen 18 years. It's the truth. It's the truth. And so that means we have to become obsessed with credit scores.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up, because a lot of these webinars and seminars I was attending before COVID, that was always the big issue. I got this great business going, I got great revenue, but guess what? My books aren't in order. The bank is telling me I need this and I need that. And a lot of people, especially people of color, are very frustrated.
Yeah, James, you're spot on that. And when you talk about, people saying that the business is up and running, and they even have a fancy business plan. In fact, I'm going to say something negative about business plans. You need one, but it's never going to get you a bank loan. And I know so many people who go from bank to bank with a really, really sophisticated business plan, and they scratch their head and they wonder, why am I being denied? I'm going to tell you that the bank's going to look at the business plan for sure, but they're going to be looking at that credit score first and foremost. And I'm going to say this on your show, I think a credit score might mean more so than your business plan. You need both. But far too often, small business owners are only being told about a business plan, and they're blindly being led into banks with a business plan and not a credit score.
So what's the second thing we're going to talk about before we go into the community reinvestment? You still wanted to talk about something else. What was the second thing you wanted to talk about?
Sure. I think I was talking about just access to products and services, and how there's what we call banking deserts. Mm-hmm. And neighborhoods or people or families can be underbanked or entirely unbanked. So let's quickly define those two terms, because it sounds like a bunch of jargon. To be underbanked might be you have some banking products and services in your life. Maybe you have a credit card, but maybe you still don't have a bank account and you still pay with money orders. And you don't have a lot reporting on your credit report. And you're still doing things that cost money with service fees and predatory fees. And because your credit score is low, you get a car note at 38% instead of having a competitive credit score and getting a car note, a third of that or a fourth of that. I quickly want to say this. The new face of poverty is driving around a really expensive car note. And what do I mean by that? In this case, there's too easy access. I was first saying there isn't access to safe and affordable capital. I think that's true. I think there's far too much access to predatory capital, to people saying, come buy this car, you can drive it away today. Listen, I'm going to just say this. The advertisements you hear on the radio about buy here, pay here, all credit approved, I'm going to tell you, don't do it, because that's essentially predatory rates, and you're essentially remaining poor, if you will, by driving around an asset. I put in quotes because it's not an asset, it's depreciating every day. Depreciated in value, that is a vehicle. Whereas real estate could potentially appreciate every day in value, which means if you're driving around a big car note, then you're driving around a mobile home, and you should be putting that money into buying a house. So that's maybe being underbanked. What is unbanked? Unbanked is you have no interaction with any mainstream financial service provider. What does that mean? You never step foot in a bank or a credit union. You cash your checks at a convenience store. You go to a payday lending place. Oh my God, don't get me started about payday lending. It's criminal. It's legal in the state of Missouri, but it's criminal, okay? I think it's criminal.
Galen, here's what I think is interesting. If you go, let's take Grand to Natural Bridge, you take it all the way out to Lucas and Hunt, or as even further than that to Highway 170. You may see one, two, maybe three banks. Now, if you go from Grand, Manchester, all the way out to West County Mall, you're going to see 20 to 30 banks almost on every other corner. It is crazy.
Yeah, James, you're spot on. North Grand and quote unquote north of Del Mar, and Justine Peterson's located north of Del Mar, is a banking desert. But I do need to give a shout out to a few banks that I feel have made steps in the right direction in that area. At our office at 1023 North Grand, we've created a hub of financial services. Simmons Bank has a loan production office there, and there's an ATM that's available. In fact, that ATM is one of the most used ATMs in the entire network for that bank, so that's amazing. Alonzo staffs that office. Alonzo is an amazing loan production officer for Simmons Bank, so please stop by and see him sometime at 1023 North Grand. We've recently welcomed All True Credit Union, which was formerly First Financial Credit Union, to 1023 North Grand. Ashley Fisher is their superstar loan officer, banking practitioner. She does it all, opens up bank accounts, secured credit cards, small dollar loans, car notes. Again, I want to strongly suggest people reaching out to both of them. That said, as you go up North Grand, I got to give my hat off to PNC Bank. PNC opened a branch right at the corner of Page and Grand in the last 10 years. Again, it was a banking desert before they arrived. And so, sure, slow but sure, we're seeing some progress, but you're exactly right. Some zip codes have more banks and some zip codes don't have any.
It's really a shame. It really is. Now, let's talk about community reinvestment. Let's talk about that.
Sure. So there's a piece of legislation, and it's over 30 years old at this point, called the Community Reinvestment Act, CRA. And what's great about James bringing it up today is that because it's called community, the community needs to know about it, and the community doesn't. In fact, we need to get the word out to church groups, neighborhood associations, block captains. When people are in the barber stool, they need to hear about the Community Reinvestment Act. And it's a requirement that banks reinvest in neighborhoods, that they merely not take, but give back. So what do we mean by that? Well, if I live in North St. Louis and have a deposit in a bank, but then they take my money and do other things with it and invest it outside my neighborhood, then the community's not benefiting. So CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, requires legislatively for banks to reinvest in communities in their assessment area. They get evaluated. They get a score. And they also get something called a qualitative label. Satisfactory, outstanding, or needs to improve. Let me say this much. Reliance Bank, which is now Simmons Bank, I mentioned Simmons earlier, went from a satisfactory to an outstanding by doing a lot of things in the community. And one of those things is partnering with Justine Petersen, creating a minority contractor loan fund, dollars available for minority contractors, drywallers, people doing concrete work, to access money so they can do payroll, buy materials, and bid on these jobs. So this idea of getting a score, banks are they're reviewed. They're reviewed, which means we have to push banks to invest in our communities and push examiners, the FDIC, the OCC, and the Federal Reserve to make sure that they're, putting these banks through hyper scrutiny and not just giving them an A++ without really looking at the communities. Because all I know is this: we can drive through the assessment areas of many of our banks, the neighborhoods that essentially have vacant lots, abandoned buildings, and disinvestment. And those all fall under assessment areas of banks that are reviewed through the Community Reinvestment Act. So again, I appreciate you bringing it up. And the important word there is community. The community needs to know about the Community Reinvestment Act. And we need to get the word out again to church groups, neighborhood associations, block captains, barbershops, salons.